everyone, and welcome to the .NET Core podcast, the only podcast which is devoted to .NET Core, ASP.NET Core, EF Core, SignalR, and not forgetting the .NET Core community itself. I am your host, Jamie Gaprogman Taylor, and this is episode 65, MartinDB with Jeremy Miller. In this episode, I talked with Jeremy about MartinDB, what a document database is, how that differs from a relational database, and whether you should contemplate using a document database rather than a relational one. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So the first thing I'd like to say, Jeremy, is thank you ever so much for spending some time with us today. I know that, time zones don't make things 100% easy, and I know that it's rather early in the morning for you. So thank you ever so much for wanting to spend part of your early morning with me and the listeners. And thank you ever so much for agreeing to be on the show as well.
Oh, thank you so much for reaching out. And any chance to talk Martin, we'll take it every time.
Excellent stuff. Excellent. So we'll come on to what Martin is in a little bit. But I was wondering, for the listeners, could you perhaps give us a brief overview of like a bio, like who you are, the work you do, that kind of thing?
Sure. So I'm Jeremy Miller. I'm a senior software architect at CalVista Software in Austin. We're a custom software development shop. I'm also the author of several open source tools in the .NET space. You may or may not have heard of any. So I wrote Structure Map. That was the first IOC container in .NET. I'm one of the lead developers and the core maintainers of Martin that we're going to talk about today, and a couple other things along the way.
Excellent. Like you hinted at there, we're going to talk about, well, we've said it a bunch of times. We're going to talk a bit about Martin. Now, throughout my sort of professional career, I've only ever interacted with a SQL-based database. So I know that Martin, I'll let you describe it in a moment, but I know that Martin is a document-based database. And although I know like the theory of what that entails and how it all works, I've absolutely no experience of that in real life. So I apologize in advance in case I ask any kind of silly questions that you're thinking, oh, well, you should know this, Jamie, because I really don't.
No, that's okay. So in a relational database that all of us have used at some point in time, most of us are probably still using today. Most of us will probably be using in 10 years because it's so entrenched. Data is organized in terms of tables, of columns and rows. It is a two-dimensional piece of data. And the world is much more complicated than that. So, of course, an order has order details, a person has dependents, has these things and these things. So then you start to pick up relationships between tables. But you're still working really hard to represent your world as tables, columns, rows, so on and so forth. That's great. It's awesome for reporting. It was fantastic for some of the early work I did in my career, like supply chain work or ordering parts, things like that. But in the real world, when you're talking about now the behavior of my code, the world is hierarchical. I may have a user, but I have types of user. I have parts, but I have different parts. Or God forbid, if you get into financial software, when you represent trades in the finance world, each kind of trade has a totally different set of data, but yet you still want to try to fit that to a relational database, and things start getting really nasty as problem domains get into places where maybe you have a lot of polymorphism, maybe you have very deep hierarchies. One of the projects CalVista works on right now, our client's problem domain is everything relates to a top level entity. Let's just call them a person, but that person has up to 2 or 3 dozen other kinds of related entities. And breaking that down into and mapping that to a relational database, you run into the old impedance mismatch of the way that data wants to be shaped in your code, where it's all about behavior, becomes very different than how the relational database forces you to structure it. So here I'm trying to prove out that the relational database is not the end all be all for some problem domains, right? So in a document database, what we're trying to do is we're trying to persist that person basically just the way it is, and bypass a lot of this mapping. So taking the example of Martin, and Martin sits right on top, and we can talk about why. Martin sits on top of the PostgreSQL database. But what Martin's doing is taking your object, instead of mapping it to individual columns, tables, whatnot, it's JSON serializing your document and stuffing that in a database somewhere. So all your mapping problems go away. As long as it's JSON serializable, you're good to go.
Oh, fantastic. I do like that idea because, like you say, there are just some things that cannot be easily maintained in that sort of relational status, right? There are only so many foreign keys and join tables and all sorts of craziness like that until you start pulling, at least in my instance, pulling what's left of your hair out, trying to figure out, how do I get this data and that data? And then, you look at Entity Framework and you end up pulling the entire object graph back and all you want is one piece of data, and it all gets a bit much to organize, I guess. Keep in your head as well. If you've got 15 different tables and they're all interrelated, you have to be able to keep all of that, if not in your head, on a piece of paper and explain it to someone else, right?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So you're saying that MartinDB, I can just give it, like you said, if your object is JSON serializable, I just either do I JSON serialize it, or do I just give it to Martin and it handles?
You tell Martin, I want you to store this object. And there's a few extra requirements. Martin has to figure out what the identity is of your object. Usually just as long as you have an ID property or field, and you can override this with explicit stuff if you absolutely have to and be special and different, and people do. But as long as Martin can figure out what the identity is, and it can be serialized to JSON, that's it. That's enough. Martin will take care of everything else for you. Moreover, Martin, Postgres has some special upsert capability where it's very efficient to do upserts. So we don't even make you care. We don't even make you tell Martin, unless you really want to, whether it's an insert or an update. It's just, I want to persist this. And Martin will get the ID for you. It'll assign it if it has to, just like you're used to with the F-Core, and it'll persist it to the right table. If you're working in development time with a development mode on, Martin will build the necessary underlying tables by itself for you on the fly. So you can focus on getting stuff done, thinking about your problem domain, evolve your model objects as you need to, and don't even think about database migrations or structure or anything like that. Just go on what you're really trying to do.
I really like that. The amount of times when I've been interacting with a relational database with Entity Framework, and you make some change and you've been working for several hours to implement some new field or something, and you've implemented everything, and then you hit go and it all falls over miserably because you've forgotten to create a migration, or because your migration failed because maybe you're using SQLite or MySQL rather than MS SQL, and some field isn't supported somewhere, and it all goes a bit wobbly, and you sat there for hours going, why isn't this just write the data?
But they're done that, man.
Yep. Excellent. Okay. So let's talk about the backing store then. So Martin communicates with Postgres.
Yeah. So Martin, be really clear, MartinDB is a fancy data access library. It's completely passive. All the heavy lifting work is done with PostgreSQL, and we do that on purpose. I'll just step ahead to the inevitable question: why is it on Postgres and not SQL Server? Since we are a Microsoft shop, so Postgres has some unusual JSON support for a database that goes way beyond what everybody else does. There's a binary format. It's actually in a binary format called JSON-B. So your JSON document is kind of pre-parsed out in a binary format internally. So querying within the document is much faster. There are a lot more operators for querying inside the JSON document that we have to use to give Martin its link provider support. And Postgres has a lot of facilities for indexing a JSON document for searching. So all that kind of database indexing that you expect today of, hey, I am always querying on this one field or this combination of fields. We still have the ability within Martin, because of Postgres support, to give you computed or calculated indexes within that document. So everything is still fast the way that you're used to, you expect it to be.
Sure. That you did preempt one of my questions, and that was why Postgres.
Yeah.
I can tell you've done this a lot.
We very much know that Martin could probably have much higher adoption rates if we were able to support SQL Server. And we do pay attention to SQL Server as it's clearly improving its own JSON support, but we don't think it's quite there yet. We may try to bite the bullet within the next couple of years and support a subset of Martin, but Martin was very purposely put on Postgres for a reason.
That's fair enough. You use what's the phrase I'm looking for? You use the best tool for the job, with best being in bunny quotes, right? Because it's the best that's available right now. Excellent. So you said there that I take my object in C# or .NET Land. We'll come on to that in a moment. But you take your object in .NET Land, your POCO or whatever, and you say to Martin, go store this. Martin then communicates with Postgres, does some JSON magic, and some binary data gets dumped into the database, right?
Yes. By default, this can be replaced, but by default, it's using Newtonsoft.json, like almost everything else.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's become one of those ubiquitous languages. You kind of can't do at least ASP. Well, you couldn't for a while do ASP.NET Core without using Newtonsoft, because it was actually a dependency on, I believe, ASP.NET Core 2. So totally makes sense, right? It's quite easily the best JSON parser out there for .NET. And, it covers even like partially correct JSON and stuff like that. It's kind of self-healing in that aspect, because it's had a small core team of people working on it for, I want to say, about a decade now, but I don't think that's quite right. But
I think it probably is. So it is definitely not the fastest serializer. We've been able to clock out JIL, JIL, as much faster supporting Martin, but Newtonsoft has the quality of everything just works, and all the other serializers, eventually you hit some kind of problem with it.
Sure. And I guess from your point of view as a sort of tools designer, you can't guarantee that the JSON pass to Martin will be standard compliant, or it won't fit into one of these corner cases where, Jill can do maybe 99% of everything, and then somebody tries to store some mission critical data without ever having tested it. Jill falls over, and then you get a bunch of really nasty emails at 2:00 in the morning. My entire enterprise has fallen to pieces because I never tested it, and it's all your fault.
Well, so yes, exactly that. Hopefully you would test it before you got into production, though. Hopefully.
Fair enough. Because my other question was going to be around this sort of area is, obviously, if you're storing JSON in a database, to be able to search on that, you've got to either, I don't know how Postgres works, but you've either got to be able to do some kind of text manipulation in the database, or read it back out, read everything out, hope that you have infinite amount of memory, parse everything, or rather deserialize everything, and then search on properties, right? But you're saying that Postgres has this ability to sort of binaryify, for want of a better word.
Yes. So older Postgres, before Postgres 12, they have their own custom operators to retrieve a single piece of data within the JSON and to compare it. So when you're querying against the Martin data store, most of the time you're probably looking up a document by its ID. That's easy. But if you're saying, I want to reach in, I want to find all the documents where this child prop equals this. So we provide a link provider on top of Martin. That's parsing the link expressions, doing all that munging, And that's creating a SQL string that knows how to use Postgres' own stuff to reach in and query within a document. We try as much as possible. We try to hide that kind of detail from you. The older Postgres operators aren't super friendly. You don't really want to use those. So for the most part, we're letting you use LINQ. With Postgres v12, there is a new industry standard called SQL/JSON. As more databases adopt JSON, it's allowing you to use JSON path operators to query within stored JSON documents in the database. And that gets to the point where it's user-friendly enough that you could actually use it yourself. So we have some helpers that kind of straddle the line of if there's something LINQ can't do for you in Martin, we've got a helper that'll let you use SQL fragments to query within documents as well. And that's much more valuable when you hit newer versions of Postgres that supports that JSON path model searching.
I see. Yeah, because that was going to be, that to me is an important thing, that I can actually query that data in a very a performant way. Because, as good as straight text manipulation is, I don't want to have to do JSON traversal, because I'm getting flashbacks of doing XML traversal, and I'm just
no. And at this point, a .NET developer is expecting a LINQ provider, and that's something that's been a little soft. We don't have. I mean, we're a little Rebel Alliance project. We don't have the same breadth of the EF Core team, but that's something ongoing. We're deep into a V4 release. And we're making a lot of improvements to the LINQ provider to fill in the gaps of what things work and don't work. But that's what a .NET developer expects right now. So that's what we're going to try to give them.
Sure, that makes sense. And I guess it gives... So if I have a pre-existing application and it has some database technology, and let's say I'm using Entity Framework, it's not going to be a trivial job to just swap out for MartinDB, is it? Or is it? Because you said earlier on that if you're in development mode, it can do all of the database migrations for you.
It can. So if you were picking up strictly if you were switching over just development, it may not be that bad to switch from EF Core to Martin. But in the real world, you have all your existing data. And that one, I won't oversell that. You would have to write something yourself that loads all those objects into memory and then lets Martin persist it off the side. That one's not going to be clean.
Sure, yeah. So, but let's say I'm greenfield project, right? I'm starting something brand new. I'm 3 days into it, and I think maybe this isn't for me. I want to swap it out for Martin and Postgres. I can just maybe spend an afternoon, a day, a couple of days.
If you're comfortable with Postgres, you're going to be able to do that. And Postgres has a much smaller binary footprint than SQL Server. So spinning up a Postgres Docker container just for development is like that. Sure. Yeah, you'd be able to switch over. And we finally got it together in the last couple months. We have the pretty standard obligatory extension methods off the generic host builder. So if you're on .NET Core 2 or 3, that pattern that pretty well everybody's going to have to follow from right now, extension methods right off of host builder or the service collection to have a very similar bootstrapping. We have that now. So you can add Martin much faster to a .NET Core application than you could 3 or 4 years ago, where it was still a little bit of piecing it together because every type of framework had a totally different bootstrapping.
Sure. Okay. So let's talk about the data that I can store. We talked earlier on about you have this, maybe you have a relational database and you've got a couple of foreign keys and a join table, a one-to-one and a one-to-many and a many-to-many and all these kinds of hundreds of things. What I'm getting from what you're saying is obviously if I have some big complex map in a relational database, give that to Entity Framework and I've told it where the identity keys and stuff are, it will take that out and it will split out and it will say this part of the object goes into this table, this part of the object goes into that table, and it will figure all of that out for me. But because I'm giving a JSON blob to Martin and it's doing some communicating with Postgres? Is it literally just that JSON blob as it is goes into the database, or is there some splitting out and separating? Or
No, it's that JSON blob goes in, and I should say it's not a silver bullet. Martin works best. Any document database is going to work best when you have these top level entities that are relatively isolated from each other or other types of documents. We have some limited ability we can still let you utilize foreign keys between documents. But if you're getting to the point where that kind of relationship is that important, then you probably are better off going back to EF with a relational database. But yeah, if you can be thinking mostly in terms of entity hierarchies that are isolated from each other, there's nothing else going on. You just give it to Martin as long as you are JSON serializable. You're good to go.
Okay. So I'm just trying to think of any examples that I can come up with of data types. Maybe not data types is the wrong word, but like any kind of data that I can come up with off the top of my head that I would store in a document rather than a relational table, because document databases, like I say, are still kind of new to me. So I'm just trying to think, are there any examples you could think of off the top of your head that are great for document versus relational?
So any place where you have a lot of polymorphism. So I brought up the financial trades, getting into energy trades, where anything with financial, where different kinds of trades there's some properties in common, but they have very different properties underneath that, different child collections. Sometimes you want to look at them as the same thing. Sometimes you don't. Maybe there's a lot of variable in the structure. The way that we persist things with Martin, it can wallpaper over hierarchies like that very easily. There's not as much energy in creating that map to the relational. That's where something like Martin really takes off. Or any kind of operation, like a system I was trying to describe, we have at work now, where we have a top level entity in Entity Framework, and literally about 25 to 30 related entities that hang off of that in terms of collections. What is this person doing in this year, this season, so on and so forth. And very frequently we need some subset of that. So the amount of time you spend thinking about eager loading, lazy loading, including this document, including that, where you're spending a lot of time telling EF Core what to do to make it fast. If we were using Martin, we'd probably pull the whole thing, but what we'd be doing is behind the scenes, we're making one query by the primary key and grabbing one quick JSON blob really fast, and then letting the optimized serializer bring it to us. So all that mental overhead of how do I optimize this data access as I go in this deep, rich hierarchy of objects, Martin just cuts off through that and makes a lot of that worry go away. For me, I would tell people in a simpler system, I don't think it matters very much. But as soon as your domain model starts to get more complicated and deep levels of this guy has a bunch of those guys and those guys have a bunch of these objects, or there's a lot of polymorphism, then a document database is going to work much better, much faster, lower friction.
Sure. That makes sense. You talked earlier on about migrations can happen automatically in development mode. What happens when I come to release then?
Yeah. Because DBAs tend to not like having applications have rights to change themselves on the fly. Weird that way. This is a part of Martin that's not fun to work on or develop. But we have quite a few facilities to even command line support, especially now with .NET Core, of, okay, this is the way the database is supposed to be. These are the entities it's supposed to know about. Things like these are the indexes that the application has defined, foreign key relationships, just all these other things Now, compare that to this database that's running in production, if you can, or Target, whatever it is, and just dump me out a Delta SQL file that will make the necessary updates, table adds to bring the production database up to speed with where I'm supposed to be. So we built in a lot of that work. You could run in development mode where it just creates everything on the fly, but there's a potential that it could actually destroy things. You can go down to lesser degrees of it's okay to add new things, but don't change anything that's existing, and so on and so forth, down to all the way of never make any kind of database changes on your own. Depend on somebody explicitly creating the migrations. So we've tried to work it that way where Martin can try to create its own migration files for you. And then you plug that into one of our clients. We use Roundhouse just as a way to tie database migrations. Whatever migration tool you use, take the up and down SQL files we generate and just plug it in however you do your database migrations. And it mostly works. We have something that needs to get a lot better. We have some support for, say that you need to change your document structure. We have some support for doing transformations of document structure from another. In worst case scenario, Postgres supports running JavaScript in the database because you can't get away from JavaScript, so it's going to follow you somewhere. The worst case scenario, you can write a JavaScript function and Martin will slurp that up and use that to do the transformation inside the database.
I see. So there's lots of different options then. Because that was something I was concerned about. If I can only change the structure, the schema of the database in development mode, how's that going to work in production? But it makes perfect sense. Just like you would with EF Core, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's the kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that separates this from being, that's a cool development toy, but I have to do serious grown-up work, and we want Martin to be something that's very suitable for serious grown-up. Let's get paid for this work.
Sure, yeah, it makes sense to go after that rather to target that first. And then sort of be able to, if you want to backpedal into, let's look at this cool toy and play with it. Not to like, what's the phrase I'm looking for here? Not to sort of take away anything from the frameworks and libraries that are at this is a cool toy. But obviously you want people to be using it in production before people start playing around with it in their own free time, right? Because otherwise, if it's not ready for production, no one's ever going to use it.
Exactly. And Martin was built explicitly at one of my former employers. We built it explicitly to use in production.
You can always tell, I think, at least I think you can always tell when you're using some kind of tool or framework and it's like, have you really thought about how this is going to work in production, in the real world?
Yeah. And I mean, as an open source author, the only way to really get your tool good at that, it's a little bit of a chicken egg problem. You've got to have users that are willing to share feedback with you. And Martin's been a very good experience with that. Martin is a feasible product to use because of how many early adopters we had and how much community feedback we've had over the last 4 or 5 years.
Excellent. I do like that, getting it almost like dog fooding it, but sending it out to people, hey, go try and build a real world application in this. Because if your tool only supports the sort of hello world, clean room, green field, we've just started a project, then you're not going to get as many people who are like, hey, I'm supporting this thing and I want a new way to communicate with this database that pre-exists that you support, but you're only supporting that I have a new database path. You're never going to get that user, right?
Oh, that's definitely correct. But at the same time, your hello world needs to be really easy and fast to get going. So, or folks will not get to the grown-up stuff that makes production possible.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're talking at the time of recording because there's a bit of time machine time. What do I call it? Timecast pod machine wibbly wobbliness to do with when things are recorded and when they're released. So at the time of recording, you're gearing up for Martin version 4. And I was just wondering, so earlier on I thought we could talk about Martin as if nobody's, or rather as if the listener hasn't heard of it, because I certainly haven't heard of it. But now let's pretend I'm a Martin 3 wizard. What can I look forward to in Martin 4?
Well, so let's take it. There's two main tracks of changes coming. So we've been talking about Martin as a document database. Martin also has a pretty substantial event sourcing set of functionality. It fits very nicely. It actually uses a lot of the same document database infrastructure. So there are two tracks here. What I'm personally most focused on now, and I need to get out of the way of everyone else soon. We're going through all the internals of Martin and looking for every possible place where, hey, we could reduce memory allocations, we could reduce dictionary lookups, generally looking for any place to simplify the internals, make it faster. Making a big effort on the link provider. There are holes in the link provider. People find them. You get enough people using your tool, they find the problems and the shortcomings. Making a big leap in the capability of the link. There's some missing features, the document database features that people expect that we haven't had until now, but we made some breakthroughs, and that one's on the way. The much bigger effort is the event sourcing functionality. That's maybe unfortunately been popular, and people have a huge wish list of things they wish they supported. So we're making, I think, an order of magnitude improvement in Martin's event sourcing capability to get it ready for much more complicated scenarios, much bigger data loads, be able to scale. People like the event sourcing in Martin, but they need it to be much more robust than it has been until now. So those are the big changes.
Oh, excellent. Okay. So Martin DB, or rather Martin can do event sourcing as well as be a database communication to an ORM. I mean, that's...
It's that, and Martin is definitely not an ORM.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Nope, that's okay. That's kind of famous. I get touchy. So RM's a document database and an event sourcing tool. The event sourcing part of Martin, the projected read side documents that you would expect out of event sourcing are just Martin documents. So that was a nice little bit of synergy between the two tools. But almost as a lark, honestly, because we didn't need it at the time 4 or 5 years ago. But I had done a lot of experimentations at my job for using Postgres for actually a Node.js event store. And that project looked like it was all going to go completely to waste. So I was irritated about it. So I, just for fun, spent a couple weeks and put basic event sourcing into Martin. Other people, the people that are now the other core contributors to Martin, and community folks took that and turned that into something much, much larger than what I'd originally put in place. So that has, surprisingly to me, I think, been what feels like the most popular part of Martin. Sure.
Okay. So you're saying that you're taking the event sourcing and improving it. Is it production ready at the moment? Would you? Well, no, I guess that's probably not the right way.
It is in production, so it better be production ready.
Okay, because my question was going to be, should I feel confident building an event sourcing platform or a platform that uses event sourcing with MartinDB and just go, yeah, switch it on, just leave it? I mean, obviously, I've got loads of tests everywhere, but
in an application that doesn't have an extreme amount of events, but I've heard from at least one user that stores in the realm of millions of events a day in their system. a smaller to mid-level system, I know that some people have had success with bigger. The problem with a tool like this, and when you talk to one of the authors of a tool like that, I'm always focused on the problems and the places that need to be better. So yeah, you could do it today, but there are some missing things. We don't support document metadata. So for things like tracing the events to session ID or user ID, that's coming up. Being able to do, we have some support for asynchronous projections. Events are always flowing in, and then something behind the scenes is trying to catch up and rebuild the projections. With V4, we're going to make that cloud friendly. So instead of you being responsible for where is this projection building happening, have things that support the new leader election, to be able to work on clusters of boxes, be able to do partition the event store. So you're looking at being able to move Martin into very, very large applications. Things like people say, hey, my read side projection, and I changed it. I want to now rebuild it to this new model, which we can do. But as you want to use Martin in much bigger systems, we're coming up with ways to hugely optimize how that projection rebuilding goes. Again, more of that grown-up stuff you don't do when you're just playing with it, but when you're trying to use it for real grown-up, pay-me work. We're growing up into that.
Sure, that makes sense. I mean, everything you've said so far makes me think that this is, you said yourself earlier on, it started out life as a real tool you were using for one of your previous roles. It strikes me very much as this is something I want to make for enterprise users to use in their enterprise, or at least production users to start there, and then see what we can do to make it even more production-y or enterprise-y, which is refreshing.
That's fair enough. Yeah.
It's quite refreshing, because I see that so often, mostly in the JavaScript space, where someone will go, I have this great new framework. It's version 1 and I've already deprecated it.
Yeah, I'm aware. I know.
Excellent. Okay. So what does the future hold for Martin? I know we've talked about version 4, but it might be that this goes out after version 4 ships. It might be that this goes out before version 4 ships. I mean, this is more like
this is not going to go out before version 4 ships. No.
Fair enough. Okay. So like the obviously I want to make it very clear to anyone who's listening that anything we're talking about, any of these like wish list of things that you'd love for it to do, this is obviously me not tying you down to it will do this, but this is like in an imaginary world where there are no time budgets and you can write code for 72 hours straight without having to then lay down for a week. I mean, that's how I feel. I don't know how you feel. But if you lived in a world like that, what would be some of the things you would implement?
Sure. So I know one of the things that the other core contributors, and I'm not the only core contributor, also a reason why Martin is turning into a grown-up project. One of the things I know we would like to do, we need to find a way to make development sustainable. One way or another, it needs to produce a little bit of revenue of some kind. So that might be after V4 or part of V4. It may be some paid commercial add-ons, especially for things like making it cloud ready. Here's an AWS recipe with support for dynamic clustering, the event sourcing, leader election, stuff like that. Or, here's an Azure compatibility. That's one realm of things, especially as the event sourcing grows up. The other big thing, I snuck in of here's why we don't support SQL Server yet. At some point, Martin's probably going to have to keep growing. We're going to have to be able to go cross database and find some way to get at least a big subset of Martin running on SQL Server. There's occasionally people ask us about Oracle or MySQL support, but in the .NET space, SQL Server, we know if we could support SQL Server that Martin user numbers would probably, we think, would explode.
Sure. I wonder whether, in that case, then postulating, theorizing, whatever, if you could probably get the paid support sort of structure in place before doing the sequel, and then voila, here's SQL support, and then everybody goes, right, I'm going to move all of my, again, buzzword bingo, my microservice powered event source databasey things over to Martin.
Yes, exactly. If you have any thoughts about how to make it happen, I'm sure that we would love to hear. And we do know that there's an issue. So Martin's older than Cosmos DB, but I mean, we're playing in the Microsoft world, and anybody who's interested in this kind of thing is paying attention to Cosmos DB right now. So that's a little bit of an issue. I mean, I would just say that I think Martin has easier usability, and Martin will definitely have less expensive hosting costs because of Postgres. But I mean, that's something we're going to have to wrestle with as well.
Sure. Okay. So then, is Martin open source? Is it?
Yes, under the under the MIT license.
Okay, fair enough. So then, if I as a developer think, oh, I've got this great idea for a feature, or I have this issue and I want to see if I can fix it, do you take pull requests, or is it a case of it's open source, but if you really want to, I mean, how does that work?
So we do. So I've been involved with open source and .NET since, let's see, Structure Map was production ready in 2004. It was on SourceForge. Not that anybody downloaded it for the first 5 years, but it was on SourceForge, publicly released in 2004. So I've been around open source a lot, but Martin is the one project I've been involved with that's had a lot of contributors. So Martin's had over 100 contributors over the years. So people, I'm using it, I need to do this specific thing. I need to define indexes with composite keys. I want a couple little releases ago, one of our big contributors added full text search. So it's very much a community project. We get additions and fixes at the documentation, but yeah, we've accepted pull requests from over 100 people now.
Wow. See, that's, I do know of a few, I don't know what I call them, like a jar source rather than open or closed, like the door is slightly ajar, where they're like, we're open source, but we don't want anything from the community. So that's why I kind of asked that, you see.
Well, there's a lot of open source projects where we'd love to have contributions from the community, but nobody's interested. Martin's hit that sweet spot of it's something that people have been interested, wanted to, and been willing to contribute to.
Sure, excellent. So then, if folks go to what was the page now? The Jasper framework.
So the homepage for Martin, it's martindb.io, but it's MARTEN. Because it's named after the little weasel-like character, or the little weasel-like animal, and not Martin the person.
Right, I see. Okay. So if I go to martindb.io, there's, I had a look earlier on, but there's documentation, examples, and links to wherever the source code is, and you can just sort of play around from there.
Exactly. And you'll also find a link to the Gitter room for Martin that you can use. That's your Gitter is like Slack tied to GitHub repositories, but that'll get you right to the Gitter room for Martin. That's where all of us hang out. So if you have any questions, conversations, suggestions, that's how you immediately get a hold of the Martin community.
Sure. Okay. So I guess that's the best place to go, because that was going to be my next question, right? Where's the best place to go to learn about MartinDB? That's the website. It has the links to all of the things, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Excellent. So what about catching up with you then, learning about all of the other projects that you're working on? How do I, as a listener, find out more about Jeremy and what you're working on?
So my blog, my old website is at jeremydmiller.com. I don't blog as much as I did back in the Code Better days in the late 2000s, but I try to. So Martin's kind of an accident that it took off the way it is, but most of the open source projects I'm involved with are under the Jasper FX family of projects, including Martin, which is all now part of it's officially blessed by the .NET Foundation. We're still not sure what that really means, but we're blessed. So there's a bunch of ongoing projects that I work on, a lot of which are actually used by Martin itself. Do you mind if I make a quick rundown of some of the things you could find?
Absolutely, please do.
Okay. So, said up front that I worked on Structure Map. I'm the original author of Structure Map. That is, just once again, the oldest, the original IOC container in .NET, which means that it has a lot of very old, creaky code, lots of things passed it by. People figure out how to make much faster, more resilient containers, in the 15 years since Structure Map came out. So there is a next generation container called Lamar that supports a subset of Structure Map's API that's meant to be an off-road for people that still have a lot of Structure Map code but are moving into newer technologies that will, depending on use case, will be between 1 to 2, sometimes even 3 orders of magnitude faster than Structure Map. Completely ASP.NET Core compliant. There's a very large framework I've been working on for years called Jasper that was originally meant to be a competitor to things like In-Service Bus or Mass Transit, still is, but it can be used as any kind of command processor, in-memory service bus, or a true asynchronous messaging framework. There's also Oakton. That's a small project that's yet another command line parser that I've used. It's been used off and on for about 10 or 12 years, but it has an interesting integration with ASP.NET Core and the generic host builder. So it's a way to add extensible command line parsing to any old .NET Core project today for things like utilities or development time tasks, or it adds environment tests. So that's what I'm working on today.
Cool. I was actually sort of sitting here earlier on going through because you inside a baseball talk you sent a few links through, and I was looking through the Jasper FX GitHub group, and I was looking at all of the different things, and I'm like, I wonder how he comes up with the names for all of his projects.
It's going to be kind of boring. Martin's got an interesting story I'll get to in a second. So Jasper has been my passion project for about 5 to 6 years. It was meant to be a next generation replacement for a very large failed open source project I worked on years ago called Fubu MVC. So totally an ego-driven project. The smaller projects around it. So Jasper is my hometown, back home. Little tiny, what we call in America, it's a map dot on a blacktop, right? So the other little projects, the Oakton, the Alba, that's an HP contract testing tool for ASP.NET Core, all of those refer to either small landmarks or other tiny little towns around my hometown. So just the same way Microsoft names things after like streams and little towns. So that's where I got the idea. Martin, on the other hand, I've told the story in public a lot of times, but I still enjoy it. We built Martin on purpose to replace RavenDB inside of our environment. We were having a lot of troubles with RavenDB. This is many versions of Raven ago. I know that we were doing some unwise things with RavenDB in our system. So let's make Raven a little bit blameless here. And so we had started this work of, hey, I think we could use Postgres as the foundational piece to write a drop-in replacement for Raven. Let's do it. I was working on it. My boss and collaborator called me and just asked, so what are you calling this thing? You're calling it something lame like Jasper Data or something like that, right? And I looked down at what I'm doing, and that's what I was calling it at the time. And I said, no, not at all. So as fast as I could, I Googled, what are the natural predators of ravens? And the marten, this weasel-like animal, they will steal raven eggs. So I said, no, we're going to call it marten because they're a predator of ravens. And the name stuck.
I like it. I like it because we all know that naming things is difficult, right? But
Yes,
I like
it
that
is.
you've gone for the almost like not really a Raven killer, but I guess it is a Raven killer. Yeah, let's kill Raven by creating this thing, right? I like it.
That's where we're going.
Excellent. So we've talked about how folks can get in contact with you. We've talked about where folks can go to get the information, and we've talked about where the name come from, and we talked about what Martin DB is. I was wondering, do you know of any interesting or cool projects that you've been told of that use Martin, where somebody's gone, previously we did it this way, but we found Martin, and now it's just awesome, right? It just works, and it's brilliant.
I can't talk about the specifics
Fair enough.
of that.
No, that's totally fine. Totally fine.
At least one commonly used government tool, website tool that I can't. I'm sorry, I can't talk.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? If you go after the enterprise first, then you don't find out about the cool, fun things that people are making. Yeah. That's totally cool. Okay. But I mean, that's effectively all of the questions that I have for you today. So I just want to say thank you ever so much, Jeremy, for having a chat about Martin-DB. I've learned not just about Martin-DB, I've learned a lot about document databases, and that, I mean, I knew that Postgres was a thing, but now I know enough to do some more furious Googling and find out a little bit more about, can I take this project and put it in there? Because I've got this idea. I have this project that I built a few years ago. I'm a big fan of Terry Pratchett's Discworld books, and I decided I'll do this really geeky thing of note down every time a character appears in one of the 42 novels and then group them by series. And I've done that in a relational database. And it hurts my head to think about, like, this book has many series and a series has many characters, and it's all crazy. So if I can represent every single thing as a document with this thing has a couple of these things and that's it, then I think that's what I'll do.
So that one might be a graph database. Something like Neo4j might be a better fit than Martin. But yeah, that sounds cool. So I'm a huge. If you follow me on Twitter, I'm a huge fan of the Wheel of Time, and people have made massive compendiums like that of being able to look up. Hey, I have this character. Show me what chapters and which books this character had a point of view reference to. So that the fandom of the world appreciates that kind of thing.
Cool. Okay. Well, I'll still try and do it in Martin-DB anyway, and then see how that pans out, and then I'll maybe try and do it in a GraphQL as well, and then I can compare all three, right?
Yeah. Cool, man.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I'm going to get my sort of my hands dirty with this, my feet wet with this this project. Just see what I can build with it. You've said you've gone for more of the enterprisey level. I just want to have fun and play with something, so I'm going to have fun and play with it, right?
Well, it'd definitely be more fun than any framework core.
Well, I can say for sure for this project, it most definitely will. And I haven't even tried using Martin-DB yet, so yeah, excellent.
Good deal.
But yeah, thank you ever so much for spending part of your morning with me, Jeremy. I really appreciate it. And I wish you the best of luck with Martin-DB and all of the other projects you're working on.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for having me on, and good luck with this podcast going forward.
Thank you ever so much. That was my interview with Jeremy Miller about Martin-DB. Be sure to check the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/subscribe for ways to do that. And to come back next time for more .NET Core goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.